Welcome everyone to the SeedLever Interview Series, where we explore the people and the ideas that can help you scale your early stage SaaS business. Today, I'm speaking with Akbar Karenga, Director of Recruitment at Medify, which is a platform that connects esports experts with players that want to win. Akbar, thanks so much for sitting down and talking to me today.
How you doing, Bryce? Thank you.
Really well, mate. Really well. We were talking just a little bit before, and I was saying, we met at a networking event maybe, I don't know, 6 months to a year ago now. And it really struck me when we first spoke, that you had a really interesting take on, a lot of stuff in the talent and kind of recruitment space, particularly around, remote work and culture and all those sorts of things. And I can tell that you're someone that cares a lot about it. So I really want to dig into that sort of stuff. But maybe for those who, not familiar with you, it'd be great to understand, your brief history, your background, and maybe how you ended up at Medify.
Yeah, well, I'll describe myself as just a straight out recruitment geek. It's what I've been doing for the vast majority of the last 12, 13 years. And it's started off typically with agencies. So it's the classic thing where I really learned how powerful a candidate was, because that was my way in. That made up a successful hire was a large part of my bonus, my commission when I was agency. I was probably a really bad recruitment agent back in the day. And then I moved in-house to a massive international business called Education First in China. That was my first take on actually, how can I do this thing remotely? Because every year I had to onboard 80 to 90 people from Shanghai, but they're from all over the world, and doing all the visas and stuff like that. And the first time I met them was when I was doing the airport pickup. Then same company, moved to London, and that was in their B2B SaaS division, building up sales teams. But again, I'm in London. My hiring managers are in Russia, are in Brazil, everywhere, to build up a team of like 270 people. Again, technically not remote, but definitely international. And I learned loads of lessons there. And then after that, I decided to have my midlife crisis early and go for a gap year kind of experience in East Africa, scuba diving. And then since then, it was scaling startups, young businesses, either at accelerators like for Founders Factory, or a couple of placements at Storyblock and at Multiverse. All of it was, they got a ton load of money and they want to grow really fast, correctly, diversely, and in a fact-driven way.
It's incredible. So that background is so interesting, because you've come from the agency and you've kind of seen it all now, like, big corporates down to the sort of startup thing. And it's always something I'm fascinated by, particularly when software businesses raise a heap of money, and it just really becomes about, all right, how many people can we get through the door? It's a big sort of scary moment for them, really, because they've spent so long kind of getting the culture together, and once you kind of start accelerating that hiring, I imagine that can be quite a scary thing, putting that many people through the door and maintaining all of that. How did you kind of find that experience with these businesses that are growing really fast?
So I've seen so many pitch decks across my life, and it's always, this is what we're going to do with the money. And the first one is talent. We're going to hire this engineering team. We're going to ship this. We're going to build that. And then there's the, I'm not sure if I can swear on this, there's the, oh my God moment, when they now realize, how do I do said things? And then it's the appreciation of the hardest lead you can ever chase, the hardest sales funnel you can convert is candidates. And that's usually where somebody like me comes in, who's just made a hell of a load more mistakes than the CEO on this process. I would also say that there's loads of bad advice from bad companies on how to do this. I think in our conversation, I was very rude and flippant at massive B2C brands, how they recruit, what they assess for what's important. And it's just not fact driven. It's slow. Candidates hate it. The engineer or marketer or whatever it is, they don't stay long. And that's proven out in retention rates, Glassdoor reviews, and how much they spend per hire compared to me. So it is a scary moment, but also provides a really interesting opportunity. If you get your first 20 to 100 hires correctly, so that's how you get to your Series C, is basically guaranteed, depending on how you scale your Series A.
I've heard, I mean, I'm not sure how true this is. It's kind of one of those things in startups, but they always say, at the start, you kind of need to be making sure you're hiring A players, because there's this idea that A players hire other A players.
Mhm,
Whereas, if you're hiring B players, they might hire C players, and then as you kind of scale, it kind of
mhm.
um, the I guess the selection and kind of the talent sort of thing starts to fall off.
Yeah, but
I don't
then
know.
this is
That
where
seems like something that everyone talks about. Is that something that you've
yeah,
seen?
there's a book called Why, and they talk about A players. Basically, it's bullshit because in my 12, 13 years career, I have not found one company that understands as a metric what quality of hire means.
Mhm.
At a push, they sometimes say it's a retention figure. But then if you look at the biggest longitudinal study on assessment items, it's a meta study called, by Schmidt and Hunter, 2008 was the last update. The three worst ways to assess a candidate is number of years experience, quality of degree, and the quality of their reference. But then what do most people do in terms of they assess is those three things. So
Mhm.
yes, you should be getting A players, but most people have a fundamental misunderstanding of what A player means.
Mm. I love being told that these things are, just something that kind of sounds good, but doesn't really play out in practice. It kind of strikes me. I mean, a similar one is, founders kind of always talking about this thing of, well, we need to hire people who are better than us at these things. But it's always one of those very interesting things where, you know, how do they assess like that a person might be better than them at a certain
Mhm,
area? And
mhm.
founders, can be pretty uh, I don't know. I think a lot of them struggle to release control around that and sort of trust when you're kind of bringing those people in. So yeah, I imagine you've probably seen, lots of issues around that kind of at the early stage.
Yeah, again, I love to steal and say it's my idea, but I'll try and distribute as much as possible. So Jessica Swan, she is the COO of Whereby, and she's got a really interesting Medium blog on this. And then the first thing it was part of a compensation design workshop that she runs, but it was actually asking everyone to just stop and ask yourself, what type of company are you regarding organizational design? So take your leadership team or take whoever's involved that you trust in your circle in the company, and then it's a Miro kind of workshop, and I'll maybe send the link in the notes. And it's like,
Mm.
are you a high IP, high tech business? Are you needing to have a cohort of player coaches? Are you actually, you've already got a ready moat and now you're looking for executors? And depending on where you are, that will define who are your A players, quote unquote, that you need.
Right. So okay, this is going to be one of these things where I'm just showing how little I know about this area, which is why it's so good to speak to you about this. So when you does does that kind of factor into your sort of recruitment thesis around that? Like you'll actually look at, okay, what is the company goals, and in terms of even like how they're positioned, or how
Mhm.
their business model works, and recruit around that. Is that actually something that you'll take into account?
Yeah, so I'll give you, for example, my experience at Storyblock last year.
Mm.
So we hired 86 people in 1 year. Only 3 people left the company during that time, and we 3x diversity, and it was remote first international across 35 countries. Essentially, though, what that business model was an amazing SaaS product that was already built, had already had product market fit, and the core IP build was already done by 2 technical co-founders.
All right.
So what that needed in terms of hiring was a repeatable model for the sales and the sales engine. That's number one. And then also they were going to use a lot of their spend to increase their marketing presence. So it's like a whole marketing team there. That was very, very different from, for example, where I am here now at Metify. We've got similar ambitions, are coming off a massive 25 million raise, but then we have got fantastic leadership team, but we have to still build a lot of the different products and kind of the revenue generating models after the initial beachhead that we had. So then it'll be like first of VPs who are going to be leading on so much, and we're going to be building as we go. So that is quote unquote like, I need more people who've been there and done it. It's going to be more unique first of hires. over the next couple of weeks and months.
Hmm. Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, I suppose, I guess this is sort of the conversations that I, have with founders and things where, they kind of had this, I think they kind of have this concept of like, oh, we need the next hire, like, we need the next 1, 2, or 3 hire. But it sounds like you're thinking in a very sort of systematic way about it, which is, we kind of have this thesis of the type of people we want, and we kind of build that up. Yeah, it just sort of strikes me. I haven't heard too many people thinking in that way, and maybe it's a factor of, actually just the scale part of it. Like if you need to scale that much, you need to have kind of solid processes and a solid sort of thesis behind it to actually kind of back that up.
Bryce, if you ever want to be in a time machine, go to a recruitment department. It's what you as a great marketeer and what most sales teams talk about, but 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's like account-based marketing, cohort analysis, everything that you would assume. Like if you are advising a client, you're not going to ask them to spend their lead gen budget on all the leads. You're not going to define your onboarding process for all types. You'd be like, no, this is what you're going to need. This is what you're going to be aiming for your first 6 months. Maybe we'll double down on said budget if it is working. That's just basically how I work. I steal ideas from people who do it way better in most organizations, knows how to control budgets, have got their data centric in terms of how they work, sales, marketing. I'm just going to swap the CPA or the CPC for candidates instead of customer, basically.
Yeah, it has struck me that recruitment does resemble sales so much. In a business that I worked in, where we took some of our probably most aggressive outbound like sales guys and moved them into recruitment, and they did really, really well. Because I think they essentially replaced some people who came from more of a maybe a HR background, which is like fine. I mean, it's all good, but there is kind of a bit of that, get up and go. You need to be reaching out to candidates and and kind of playing that volume game. Yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic about how similar those two things are.
I would describe it as how would BMW want to sell you a $70,000 car? How would they try and initially attract you? They would never send you the full spec sheet and the gallon capacity of a tank of petrol. They go, do you want to buy this BMW? They'll be weird, but that's what we do in recruitment. We go, here is a 4-page dot by dot. You're an accountant. Let me tell you what an accountant does, and then I'm going to use we. Of course, no, that lead would never convert in any sort of like high ticket B2C environment. So that's why I suggest just steal as much as you can from those processes that do really well. And then I look on LinkedIn so many times that I see a fundamental lack of understanding of what social selling is. That I think other industries do way better. Like my job is to have jobs. That means by definition, I should not be talking about the jobs that I have. That is so boring. So I see, there was one business I was in where I was advising, and they just automated their Twitter bot to just take their last role and just post it out again and again. He looked at their feed and was like, okay, that. And it's like, she said, oh yeah, we're recruiting on Twitter. I'm like, no, you ain't. You haven't had one like or reshare because no one cares.
Yeah. And there's so much competition out there now, isn't it, with so much money getting sort of poured into this space. I'd be interested to hear from you. I mean, how are candidates' priorities, or maybe what they're looking for, changing? I mean, maybe maybe you could take that from a more recent thing with COVID, or it could just be more broadly about how the market's kind of developing.
Yeah, I think over the last 18 months to 24 months, companies have been shown that they're liars on so many things. So flexibility was tough to do. The internet doesn't exist. International natures don't work. All of that stuff, and you've been shown that you are a liar over the last 12 months because you've still been trading. We've also been shown with the difference between the everyday person's, like I'd say, priorities. Never have we faced mortality in what we actually care about compared to what we were told to care about. So I would say there isn't a competition for talent. I would describe transparency as being super key, the morals around the business. So you see now people being needing to be by, I'd say, legislation, by social sentiment, having to speak about issues that they were very laissez-faire about talking about. But then I'd say that the competition is now no longer local with certain things. People would always think, in my city, in my block of WeWork offices that I'm in, who else am I competing against? Now it's actually that Berlin tech startup, that American service business. They're now trying to speak to people from your London HQ.
Yeah, that's been so interesting. And, I've sort of had the pleasure to work, in a few different countries and sort of seen and, open offices in a few different spaces. And, this was, sort of pre-COVID, we're sort of getting to that thing of, okay, maybe you could, we were sort of doing the nearshoring thing. But that's just opened up a whole Pandora's box, which I think a lot of companies are still kind of grappling with.
I'm going to interject and say they're not. I've never seen a financial director see a PO form come in from a country outside of their time zone and worry about how to cash that check. No, they think creatively. They're like, how can we do it? Oh my God, this is great news. Is there more of this? So it's just reverse the process again and go, what is the number one revenue generating thing or asset you have at a company? It's your staff. You've also just wiped away the second or third biggest cost you have at your company, your premises.
Right.
So I will challenge anyone to say this is a new phenomenon because they've been taking money from different countries for a long time.
Yep. Yeah, maybe it's just, I don't know. It was always seen as this other fringe thing or side thing, which I think now a lot of companies, and so this is one of the things I thought was so interesting when I spoke to you for the first time is there'd been, so we were sort of talking in a COVID context, a lot of people are trying to work out this remote work thing. And it struck me, a lot of companies had kind of gone remote. So they had an office and gone remote. You kind of opened my eyes to, hey, there's actually this thing where some companies just start remote and they're remote first, and that's kind of how they build it. I don't know if you could, even just for people who, even this might be new to them or they might not even understand the differences between them, but could you maybe just unpack some of the differences in thinking around those two things and kind of how you would approach running one to the other?
Yeah, I've been very flippant, obviously, and I've got I may be overzealous in and passionate about my viewpoint.
I like it.
Let's
let it rip.
Okay, so remote first and international for dummies is the first thing. Let's look at asynchronous and synchronous tasks, and then so there are certain things just in life that are better done live between people, but there are ways to be asynchronous about it and processes that can supplant or help buttress that. So for example, at Metify, let's talk about our all hands meeting every 2 weeks. We have people from California all the way to Sydney. Our CTO is literally in Sydney, and our CEO spends time between Pittsburgh and New York and everywhere else in between. How do we run that when we were 40 of us? So first and foremost, the slot changes between a short and a long meeting every 2 weeks, and it floats around between more of an AM slot, more of a PM slot to catch people. We create a space pre-meeting for questions. We use a pitch for the actual PowerPoint, and that sent as an open link right after the meeting. We record it as well at the same time. So that way you can be live in the experience. If you can't make it, you can still feel heard and by submitting your questions, and you can review it in 1.5 speed if you actually want to see the whole meeting. And then there's follow-up links after. That's broken what people always talk about. How do we do stand-ups, or how do we do all hands? that's one example there to really unpack between what you need async and synchronous at the same time. Also, there are certain things that are just fundamentally worse when you're not here live together in this. So, for example, support, anything that has an SLA that needs a quick turnaround time, I would always encourage have a rough rule of plus minus set time zones, because your customers, your clients, or your staff might need instantaneous answers. Then I'll move on to probably to move towards this space is how passionate you need to be at documentation, which I'm really bad at actually. I hate writing stuff down after I've done, but it's one of those things that actually, if you have a Notion page, if you use Confluence, if you use Coda, all of those, put it in a situation where like have like call it like a bus file. So if I get run over by a bus tomorrow, what will somebody need to pick up, the logins with one password, all of that there, and then just do that. Let that be your job, all your key tasks, all your OKRs. And then as you go on, so if you look on our code, it's not just, there's guides, there's dashboards, but then also my last point is about how you can lean into transparency. So I love my CEO, and I don't just say that in before I first met him, he was tweeting updates every other month of like, this is how much money we made, this is what who we hired, all of that level of transparency, but then try and bring that into your company, at least internally. So all calendars open and visible. Whenever you send certain links, make sure it's editable and commentable by default. Whenever you're in a Slack question, put it to a public group as opposed to a one-on-one. All these kind of micro behaviors will make it easier to work asynchronously and internationally.
Yeah, those are really good points. That bit at the end about those small little behaviors, because I can totally see how that would add up, to, it's kind of the sum product of all those little things that we do that bring more things on. Because it strikes me that I think with the remote working, you kind of know all the people, you interact with all the people who are like closest to you, and maybe people in your team or your direct manager, but you're not kind of getting that broader thing. So what you're saying is, open it up so it's a bit more transparent to everyone, and then everyone can kind of be across it. Maybe is there a point in there around I don't know what they say, the kind of chance meetings that you might have around the water cooler and that sort of thing? Are there things around that are that you can sort of bring some of that spontaneity in at all? Do you do anything around that?
So creative like activities, I'd say structured brainstorming. So for example, pre-work before you go onto a Miro board and you have a defined, yes, we are going to meet, it will be tough to meet, but we need to have this outcome. So as much research and prep before there. We use like upvotes and downvotes on a lot of things that we're going to do. The serendipity of ideas is actually maybe think of it in another way. So you all had to be there at 3 p.m. at that water cooler moment. But while you're potentially asleep, somebody's chewing on that problem. And that means the brain of your company is always live. So the number of like ideas or how abouts doesn't necessarily need to drop.
Yeah. One thing that we spoke about the last time we spoke, which really stuck with me, and it's funny what sticks with you. I guess it's kind of one of those things. But you said to me that when you're hiring someone remote, that they need to be someone where working remotely has meaning for them. So it's meaningful and it's rewarding in and of itself. And that's something that's like I've really taken to, because I can totally see how a lot of people have probably gotten swept up in this remote working thing post-COVID, where maybe that was just how it was when they joined. It's like a total timing thing, so it's arbitrary, or there's more jobs in there in that region. I don't know if you could speak to that at all, because it's something that's like I think really paid dividends in my business, how I've worked. But it was very non-intuitive to me that like should try to find someone where like that type of working actually has, is very meaningful for them?
Yeah. So the person that you're hiring is always going to be a better salesperson than you. For example, I'll use my example and I'll use your example. So I have an 11-month-old baby at home. There's no one who's going to dominate my time and make me do things more than I hear. So today I've got to view nurseries with my wife at 5 o'clock, and then I'm going to come back in. I'm going to do a couple of hours. Mm-hmm. There's no amount of beanbags at a company and free cereal that's going to outsell him. But then also when we look at you, me and you are talking, we've got, I don't know how many thousands of miles between us, and you wouldn't swap the amazing sun happening in Western Australia right now, your family right there, and then maybe flying back for anything that I can pitch to you in a job description. So just let people sell to themselves. Flexibility and autonomy are free. I work with loads of like growing brands who no one's really heard of. Maybe they're the fantastic payers, maybe they ain't at the same time. But I've been able to ask people, what do they really care about? Sometimes they've made the calculation and it hasn't been about the money, because essentially they are more important to their lives than their job. Just believe in people's ability to be selfish about what they really care about.
Of course. Yeah, it's a funny word, that, because I mean, yeah, you should be selfish about the things that matter the most to you. And that can really buy that in, because I suppose it is that thing, like after COVID, I think a lot of people get, like I said, took a step back and really kind of evaluated what's important. And I think it's really powerful and just feels really good to be working in a role where it's ticking a lot of those boxes for you. It's there's kind of this thing I think gets pushed around a lot of being your authentic self at work and all that sort of thing, which is great in as much as you want to bring your authentic self to work. But I think even just the security and the it just gets that feeling of being like, all right, I don't have to, there's a day that I really need to take off because of something that's like incredibly important to me, and I'd be happy to do anything to take it off, and I can. Even just like little things like that, like you said, there's companies before that would stand behind that and say no, and we've kind of realized now that that whole thing has just been this pointless exercise that we've been pursuing this whole time.
Yeah, I think so. Flexibility sometimes, maybe in my mind, I always think, okay, remote first. But I've learned actually that some people do value a hybrid element to it. They do want some sort of maybe office presence. So there was one person who maybe they were in like this really like swanky flat in the center of town, but actually they didn't just want to be stuck in their home, and they wanted. So what I think Storyblock did really well when me and you first met was actually saying, we'll give you a stipend if you want a co-working space, and you don't have to go there, but if you want to do that 1 day a week thing, please, you can. I've hired a lot of digital nomads who actually, they're in a new country, they don't know anyone, and actually working in that coffee shop or working in that co-working space is really important to them for just their mental well-being as well. So when I'm passionately saying you don't need to be in a office, that doesn't mean that you won't value, and we shouldn't set you up to work how you want to work and get that social interaction in a different way. You just won't see me there, basically.
Yeah, what is your take on the hybrid thing? Because it strikes me that we went from a culture where practically everyone had to work in the office, and then we were forced everyone to work remotely, and now people are drifting back, to either side of that. But a lot of people are settling in on the hybrid thing. Seems to me that introduces a whole lot of other challenges that we just haven't seen before, and we're still kind of working out. What's been your experience around that?
Oh, I love it. Every company that's trying to go hybrid is a perfect headhunting base for me. Okay. Because it's the worst of both worlds if you still maintain the office levels that you were going to maintain before. The only way hybrid could work is you decluster. You take your central city HQ, you wipe that budget spend, you put that same per seat cost that you had in your head, and you put that back in the candidate's hands, and then they can, so regional like co-working hubs, yes, that can there around where people actually live. So you're going to see right now, like the boom in the coffee shop in your little town or your hamlet, as opposed to everyone crying about, what about the Starbucks next to the big train station that everyone commutes into? Money and is like energy. It doesn't go away. It's pushed in a different direction. So I think hybrid is an awful compromise if you are still paying for that massive HQ office. In my history, I've worked in some of the best offices in the world. I've had yoga studios, I've had bars, I've had coffee, I've had seaside views, I've had the 14th floor penthouse offices during one of the companies I worked for, and that was across like 3 or 4 cities. But that can't be why somebody will join your business. And then also it's inherently, if you just look at the maths, so usually that office is usually very close to said business leader or CEO. It's near them, usually a heap, basically. And then you have your budget for what you're going to pay somebody. So what you're asking is, you're drawing a circle, an hour and a half around the arbitrary distance. You're looking at average salaries within that circle, and then that is your recruitment bubble. If you do even hybrid. So in London, 3,000 React engineers fall within that remit there that I talked about. If you just do plus 2 time zones globally, that's 300,000.
Oh yeah.
So when you talk about your diversity challenges, when you talk about your speed of hire challenges, if you've just X to the multiples, your total addressable market, and you're saying with the same budget, that's what I'm saying, really important one, the same budget. You're not doing remotely to try and undercut, you're not trying to save money, you're trying to get more value for the same money, potentially. Increase your needs, your requirements that you need. You want React and blah, 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 in addition to what you're doing. I guarantee hybrid makes it really tough to do that, because you are uncompetitive on one side, and then also you're going to have mangled processes internally. Like, for example, does everyone in a meeting turn on their laptops, and even though they're in the same room?
I was just going to say that. I feel like,
yeah,
I know that seems like such a silly thing, like you're talking about kind of the strategy of it. My mind immediately goes to, yeah, but how do you have a meeting? When you do that? It's like we're still kind of working that out.
Who is heard? So, for example, it's a massive problem regarding men like me and you stealing women's ideas in meetings and over speaking on them. If flexible working is naturally more attractive to underserved communities, you have me and you, like I was a great networker. It's probably my secret sauce. I was able to do that Thursday drinks in the pub after work. I was able to be like, oh, there's that guy. Okay, then suddenly I know I'd get a lead maybe the next week after. You're creating a 2-tier kind of like social capital circle thing within a company about who can show up there because of life circumstances.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Actually, something that, that does kind of strike me, because I guess people's ability to go there depends on a bunch of other circumstances and their ability to, want to do that. And you could almost essentially split the company in half, couldn't you, of people who, just always in there and they're building those networks, and then if the CEO is feeling like, hey, we're spending all this money on the office, they're going to want to be there as well. And then those people have proximity to leadership, whereas everyone else is kind of, pushed out and scattered around. Yeah, that's so you would advise then rethink that and sort of more regionalize it, or be a bit more deliberate with, how you address some of these problems that come up with hybrid.
Yeah, I there are certain things that, for example, now this is us in very much a professional services, tech services experience. A vast majority of roles can go remote potentially. There are some positions like retailers that there will be an element of you still need to have that in office, in company presence. I would say that the emancipation of the tech and professional services worker should allow other flexibilities in terms of so for example, the money that you save from having a smaller regional hub, move that into transport help for your said workers. Give them rail cards is one example there. If you're going to do that, have some sort of subsidized lunch for them there. So no one likes their landlord in life. Okay, I've never met somebody who's very happy there. So my calling to people who are considering hybrid is pay that guy less and just move it to keep those people that you need in happier and healthier. But it is, so let me example. So we are going to a wedding in July in Italy. So we're taking a long weekend, but my partner needs to be in the office on Monday morning. Now we could have stayed an extra couple of days there just because I'm fully remote. Now, I want to judge my missus' feeling when she sees, like on Instagram, we could be in Florence, but we're not. And then she'll remember that next time a recruiter slides in her LinkedIn DMs about a new position. So hybrid does create that option because you give them a taste and you take something away.
Yeah, I think the feeling is amplified if it feels unjust. I think that's one of those things, like it's the justice around it. Like, okay, you could have done something for you that was very easy to do and painless, but you didn't, and therefore, like, it's inflicted this sort of thing on me. Which I think is that kind of the root of that problem. One thing we haven't spoken about, which is probably good to touch on. You see a lot of this stuff, more than me in your travels, but the diversity and inclusion part of all this, I'd be really interested to sort of explore maybe the intersection of that and how that's playing out remotely, because it's probably not something that a lot of people are too, I don't see a lot of people talking about kind of that and how those two things interplay. What are you seeing out there around this? Like, what's working, what's not? What advice would you give?
Okay, so I was the CEO of a great agency called Pink Octopus. So she set up her business, and then by hook or by crook, she's got a mostly female team, ethnically diverse. And we had lunch just down the road, and she said, "I couldn't have done this if I was office-based and I was building my agency purely in London." It's just the numbers of, you just increase your total addressable market, so you have less of an excuse for why you are undiverse, which is a scary, scary thing for some companies to now admit, because then it's like the problem is not a pipeline problem, which is one of the biggest lies in D&I. It's actually, okay, it's our assessment problem. Also, when you're working remotely, I can't rely on me being a great networker and a nice guy in the office who asks you for tea and coffee and gets around in. Like, I would literally say I'd be a rung or two lower than I am in my career now if I was not in an office setting for the beginning of my first couple of years in recruitment. So that means women, underrepresented communities, contrary voices now have to be judged on outputs. That's absolutely amazing. Then also now we take out a layer of unnecessary middle management, which is usually, there's some of the reasons why you're having unhappy staff, because it's usually like an IC who's got in through clout, and then they represent a blocker to people needing to move, but also loads of different reasons. I have a healthy disrespect for management practices generally in most companies. So then it's like, now you've just freed up so much people to move around. There is also an element of, actually importantly, again, how to pay international people. How would you fairly, or how would you transparently show if there are differences between pay? Here at Metify, everyone gets paid. I don't care where you are, California or Morocco, both engineers are paid the same. but you might not be able to do that. How do you articulate that in a fair way? And I think remuneration is an important part of D&E, because we're saying we want different people, but invariably we shouldn't be paying people vastly different. Another way, maybe it's an opportunity or it's a question mark that we ask is, there's certain types of people who would value flexibility more than others. So parents, for example, carers. If you think about, like, 1 in 5 people in the UK class themselves as having a disability that affects their work. In one fell swoop, we have made it possible for people with long-term chronic back pain, mobility issues, all of that they can now contribute to the economy. You need to ask yourselves, okay, there's so many people that you couldn't speak to. I once had an interview at a lovely company it was in Shoreditch. It's a beautiful building, retro, lovely. But then when I got in, I was like, okay, cool. And then I saw that the last step before you get into the office was a step. There was no other way. So that means, by definition, I knew that 6% of all people in the UK could not work here. The lift was great, the ramp was great. Literally, they couldn't get into their office. That is an exciting time if you really care about your diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, there's so many people who, I guess have sort of been brought back into the workforce who, otherwise wouldn't have. And, it does just show, like, what a colossal waste of human effort and ingenuity we've just kind of very arbitrarily cut out of it, when, now, like, nothing fundamentally has changed in the last, whatever it's been, 2 years that we've been living in this nightmare.
It's intentional. So, for example, let's speak about a thing close to my heart, which is unpaid labor in terms of childcare. So the only reason a 40-hour week was designed was because, imagine a typical Mad Men-like person. Me and you, we're sitting there, we've got smoking jackets, we've got this suburban home. We always knew in our society that there was somebody doing unpaid labor at home that allowed us to do this weird time that overlaps whether people are going to be in school and child pickup. As a society, we know that's wrong, and we've decided that it's wrong, and we've let women grudgingly into the employment space, for example, as one example there. But then now how we design when work starts, how it starts, is like you're asking somebody to get the worst of both worlds. And then that leads to an increase in the gender pay gap, because the people who are more likely to ask for flexibility in their workspace to say no to that project because of what it would mean in terms of time commitment are then subsequently promoted less, are hired less. So then compound interest means that a 50-year-old person, depending on their life choices, has had vastly different opportunities, even when they've had the same talents.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're chipping more and more of these barriers away over time, and I guess we'll just have to see where the numbers go. Akbar, you've been so generous with your time and your insights there. I guess I don't know, maybe it'd be an interesting thing to get your predictions for the next 6 to 12 months. Maybe as a bit of a final point. Is there anything that you're really maybe excited about that you see that's happening out there, or challenges that maybe aren't obvious to someone like me that you could speak to?
Yeah, so I would describe it as the new wave of working flexibly and remotely has been in the vacuum of where people couldn't enjoy some of the benefits. So we were scared to be sick. Now, slowly but surely, hopefully there's a horizon online where travel, everyday life will be more unlocked. There's going to be so many moments where you see people being more digital nomads, or going for that barbecue on that Thursday afternoon because they can. That's really going to slap in the face of people who have gone remote or want to go back to office-based. So you've had a great opportunity and now you're missing it, basically, because you could have set this up now. Now the pain is going to come, is my prediction over the next 6 to 12 months. I think a big play is, if you want to buy stocks or invest, please invest in an employer of record like Deal or Remote or Oyster.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah. It's like they are the platform that's going to allow genuine remote and international work, and they've already had aggressive valuations and raises over the last couple of years. It's impossible to lose money. I think backing those. That's my little tidbit, and I don't own any stocks in any of those in case the SEC is after me.
Yeah, we'll put an asterisk there. This is not investment advice.
Yeah, this is not investment advice. And then probably we see, for example, the refugee issue that's happening in Ukraine is highlighting another social cause that companies need to have a position on. And you already see the ongoing discussions around, for example, transgender rights are now happening in sports. So Megan Reese, she is one of the professors at Ashridge Holt Education, and she's got a great study on how can you channel, bottle, and hear activism in your company. And I think that's going to carry on being more and more of an issue in businesses.
Right. Well, we'll have to chat again in 6 to 12 months, maybe, and see how it all plays out. But Akbar, thank you so much for your time today, and it's just always such a pleasure to chat to you.
Bryce, it was great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, mate.